Thanks for joining toward the end of the conference. We appreciate you coming out. Derik and I are principal engineers at Syntasso, and as Teresa mentioned, we're talking about fallacies and also platform engineering, because of course. I'm going to try to use this clicker, and it's not going to work, so I'm just going to do this. So to talk about fallacies and platform engineering, first we'll start with a definition, just so we're all on the same page for both of them, and then we're going to run through the most common fallacies that you'll come across and apply them to conversations you might be having in the platform engineering space. So first off, what is a fallacy? Basically, it is a fault in logic. So it's when somebody tries to prove a point or convince you of something using something that's a mistake. So it's invalid. They are everywhere, in every kind of conversation with all kinds of people in all kinds of contexts. And they're quite useful in certain situations. But they are also dangerous. They're dangerous because in the end, if you use a fallacy, it's to stop a conversation. And what that does is it weakens the search for truth. It stops the questioning. It reinforces biases because those biases come about because of insufficient truth, insufficient evidence. And it leads groups of people, sometimes nations or worlds of people, to the wrong conclusions. Switching gears, what's platform engineering? So platform engineering, if you're not familiar, very briefly, is a space in tech that has sort of been part of an evolution that's been happening for decades, where rather than having organizations that have developers building things in one part of the business and operations trying to deploy it with or without success in another, you've got this evolution toward DevOps teams where you have full stack, multi-skilled folks coming together to collaborate, automate, and make deployments better, success. But then at scale, that gets tricky because if you have hundreds and hundreds of application teams, all of them equipped top to bottom to be able to do anything for the stack, then you have a lot of inefficiency, you have a lot of duplicated challenges. And so platform engineering has been around for a while to help address those concerns, where organizations create teams to sort of understand the landscape of platforms, understand the landscape of the organization, and start to pull apart the common concerns, the common challenges, and create common tools for application teams so that they can focus on delivery and move forward faster. So Derik and I have been in this space for a while. We are currently at a pre-product market fit early stage startup, and that means we get to talk to a lot of people and try a lot of things, and we are working with a lot of companies and understanding what their platform engineering space looks like right now. But we've also helped build out tools like Cloud Foundry. We've been on global teams. We've consulted with ThoughtWorks and Pivotal VMware. So we've talked to a lot of companies for a long time about how to build platforms, and we've built a lot of platforms that were both terrible and great. So we've seen a little bit of everything. But in general, we are sort of the exception because the intersection that we think of for fallacies in platform engineering comes because really platform engineering to the industry as a whole is still somewhat new. So if you look at Gartner, one of the best places for research in tech, you'll see that only just last year, in 2022, they reported that for the adoption curve, platform engineering is still just getting geared up. And maybe the audience here thinks that's not the case, but generally, you're going to have a lot of people right now talking about platform engineering who've never even thought about it before this year. And where that intersects with fallacies is that it's a lot of hype. And in the face of something that has a lot of hype but hasn't been around for a long time, you struggle to have conclusive evidence. Platform engineering teams haven't been around for decades, centuries. They've been around for years. That means there's not foolproof, Loctite research saying, this is what good platform engineering looks like across the board. This is where you're going to go wrong. This is what you should do instead. The problem with being in this world is that doesn't matter. Organizations need to move forward. We understand innately that platform engineering as a practice is beneficial and can help. We just don't know all the details. In the face of that, you have a lot of people, either on social media or within an organization, having conversations about right and wrong for DevOps and platform engineering. And in those cases, in the lack of foolproof evidence, people fall back on fallacies. So they will pull anything out that they can to appeal and win the conversation that they're having and the discussion that's at hand. And that has real implications in a professional setting in terms of money being spent, time being spent, energy, jobs, all of those things. So from our perspective, we thought running through some of the most common fallacies to get you thinking about it will help you separate fact from fiction. It will also help you communicate more effectively, and it will help you think critically in sharper ways. If you're anything like we were, when you start playing with this topic and getting it top of mind, you start seeing it everywhere, and you can become quite annoying in that, but it's quite fun as well. So from that, we're talking about a whole bunch of the most common fallacies, and we'll go through a general example just to explain what it is, and then we'll apply it to platform engineering. So the first example fallacy is what's known as the hasty generalization fallacy, and goes like this. X is true for A, and it's true for B, so X must be true for everything, everywhere. And basically what that means is you're conducting the worst experiment imaginable and drawing loads of conclusions based on it. Again, you're going to see this everywhere. In my personal life, as I was working on this talk, I was facing a topic of conversation at home where I live in London, as Teresa said, and I'm considering switching to bike. I'm tired of public transportation. I've been there for a decade. It's driven me crazy. I have two small girls at home, a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and I've decided that I really want to do a family electric cargo bike. Anyway, there's a whole bunch there. My husband and I have to come to decisions together as mature adults, always, of course. So we've talked at length about this, and as you can imagine, sometimes fallacies come up. This is not a small expense, and it also means I'm on a bike every day, and my daughters are on a bike when I put them on the bike to carry them around. Coming back to hasty generalization, my husband last week came home from a night at the pub with some parents of my 5-year-old daughter's classmates, and he said, listen, I know you're super into this bike idea, and when you have an idea, you like to run with it, but I have to tell you, I was at the pub, I was at a table, and there were 3 other parents there, 3 different families, and they all cycle, and their kids all cycle as well. But they've all had accidents, Winna. It's not a good idea. And I was like, oh shit, it's really probably not a good, I'm probably gonna die, my daughters are gonna die, oh my God, he's so right. And I had to have a moment of, wait, that's 3 people. And wait, that's quite a generalization to draw from a very, very small sample size. So in my head, I thought, that's a fallacy. I did not say it out loud, but then we were able to, from that conversation, I was able to understand that safety had become one of his big concerns, and I was able to work with that and move the conversation forward. Switching context to a work context, let's imagine in a platform engineering team, somebody has just come back from a very informative conference, and they've heard a very informative talk about a company that has decided to use platform engineering. And so they did a great talk about going from no platform engineering to one team for hundreds of application teams, and lo and behold, those application teams can now start projects 30% faster. It's conclusive. So this person comes back to the team and says, The only way to do it right is to do it with platform engineering. I saw a talk where a company moved to platform engineering and they had one team and everything sped up. If we don't do platform engineering, we're doing it wrong. It's not a problem to listen to anecdotes, use those as points, consider them, and understand. The problem is you can't draw a conclusion based on that one company, and there's so much you don't know from a 20-minute conference talk. So in the face of a hasty generalization, what do? Generally, it's just about probing, trying to understand yourself, how much validity is in the example that they've given. Is there any research they haven't talked about that they know about? And then understand whether you're in a position where you yourself need to do more research or you need to ask them to do more research. The next fallacy is the slippery slope fallacy. And this fallacy goes, if I have A and then B, and B gets C, well, C obviously is going to get us all the way to Z. There's just an inevitability. We all know this. This is definitely what's going to happen. It's taking a small idea. I'm arguing for something simple, and the person who doesn't want that idea is saying, your simple idea is necessarily going to become something much bigger than you're saying, and that thing is going to be horrible. So slippery slope is really just changing the conversation, making the bounds of the question completely different than what you started with. So back to the bike example, another fallacy that cropped up is that after working through the dangers of riding a bike through London with my children, my husband was like, okay, right, so you're commuting to work on your bike, and that's going okay. And you think you're gonna start dropping Shefali off at nursery in the mornings, and that's okay too, but like, next you're gonna be taking both of them to nursery and to school, and then they're gonna hate the bus and they're not gonna take it at all. And then they're gonna refuse to take the tube. And then what about when you go to conferences for 4 days and I have to get them out of the house and I'm not gonna ride a bike? You've now forced my hand into riding a bike through London, which is not something I wanna do. And I was like, oh God, have I done that? I have not done that. No, that's not what I did. I had to step back and say, wait, that's not what, can we come back to point A, because that's where I was. Slippery slope is pretty easy to fall into, especially out of fear. So my husband was worried that he was going to lose the whole identity of our family if I start riding my bike. In a professional setting for platform engineering teams at companies, you can think of this sort of as the opposite of our last scenario, where you have an organization that has decided to do platform engineering, but the application teams are wary. And the first thing they decide to do as a platform team is say, look, we really have to rein in our AWS usage. We love how you all have gotten comfortable with making lots of instances, and we're just trying to get a handle on things. So for now, we're gonna keep your access apart from creating things. We just want you to use Jira to create your new instances, that's it, right? The slippery slope would be somebody fighting that by saying, oh, we're gonna have to use Jira to create instances. It's gonna be no time before we're not allowed access to those instances at all. Problems in production, we're gonna have no idea because we're not even gonna be expert enough to manage it. Next thing you know, we're not gonna have access to anything. We're gonna be writing code, giving it to them, and then we're gonna be right back where we started. We really should not have platform engineering at this company. So you can see how you completely change the conversation by drawing a conclusion that's far more dramatic than let's just use Jira for one task as a first step. In the face of slippery slope, how do you reel back the conversation? How do you keep the focus on the thing you're actually trying to decide about? Well, you first need to understand why are they drawing these conclusions? Where does that come from? But then consider whether there's any evidence that the slippery slope is valid. There are situations where there's truth, research, reports. But then, if not, keep the focus on what you're proposing and not that bigger picture. And especially in a professional context, if you do have appetite for experimentation and you do feel like you're facing a slippery slope, frame it as an experiment. So rather than decreeing that platform engineering as its first exercise is going to implement Jira for any new service creation, you say, we're running an experiment, we want to see if this works, we're going to run it for a month, we want buy-in, we want people to participate with us to see what success looks like, we'll check in with you, we'll create a Slack channel, and we can undo it if it doesn't work. You then diffuse the anxiety of that bigger picture problem, and you create the conversation more focused on the first step. And now I'll pass it over to Derik to go through some more.
Thank you. Cool. So the next fallacy that we're going to look at is the strawman fallacy. So I guess you all know a strawman. It's there to deviate attention, right? You have birds, you have your crops. You want the birds to believe there is a human there, and they're not going to eat your crops. So that's basically it. Like, it's distorting someone's argument or misrepresenting it somehow. So you can shift the conversation in something that is simpler and is easier to refuse and debate, right? My examples are a little bit more politically charged than Winna's. I apologize. But let's assume, or let's hypothesize that we are having a conversation about gun control, right? Someone comes over and say, well, I believe we should have stronger background checks and close a few loopholes for selling people guns. And then someone comes along and say, what? Are you saying we should disarm all law-abiding citizens? So you want people to be defenseless, so the crime will rise, murders will rise, think we're gonna live in a lawless country. Is that what you want? So you can see how we went from the strawman straight into the slippery slope and made that seem awful. So you're kind of like pulling people into an argument that is much easier to defute or to defend, depending on what side you're on, by making it the extreme. In engineering conversations, and this is 100% me, one way that this shows up is by simplification. So you're having this meeting, it's 2 hours in, people are debating how they should provide Postgres as a service. You're there, you're bored, it's like an hour and a half in Zoom, Friday afternoon. You're like, you can just use the Postgres operator. So just give the operator. You give them the operator, they create a YAML file, they apply, they'll get the Postgres. It's simple, it's very simple. That's me. So if you're saying words like, this is simple, this is very simple, why are you also overcomplicating it so much? You are probably trying to move the conversation in something that is simpler, is easier to defend, is easier to reason about. Another way is by focusing on particularities. So you want to build a platform? Let's use Kubernetes. It's extensible, great community, great conferences around the world, a lot of people know. Why not? It's like, it's simple, right? Let's just use Kubernetes. This way, you are pulling people again, highlighting, hyper-focusing on the benefits of a particular tool, but you're not actually having a debate around what are the drawbacks. Have you ever seen a Kubernetes deployment in the world? Like, how does this actually work? What are you going to do about it? And finally, another way that this can also happen is false dichotomies, right? I think Winna was mentioning an example about platform engineering teams. You can say, well, you can come out of this conference saying, we either have a platform team or we're going to continue to live in the dark ages. That's it. We either do it or we're doomed to fail. There is nothing in between. And now you are in this either-or situation where, like, which side you're on. Like, it's very hard to defend, yes, let's continue to live in the dark ages. And what should you do instead? So the first is seek clarification. It's like, what is this world that this person is painting? Trying to understand their argument. Like, what was the causation that made them believe or shift their argumentation towards the strawman? You should also point out the misrepresentation. Usually, when someone puts a strawman, your immediate reaction is like, that's not actually what I said. It's because it isn't, right? Like, your argument is something different. So you should clarify your position and make sure that you are back into debating the benefits or the drawbacks of your original argumentation. The next fallacy we're going to talk about is the appeal to consequences fallacy. And that's a pretty good one, and it happens also a lot, which is, well, if P, then Q. Q is something I want, so P is true. Like, what that is saying is, a belief is true or false based purely on my desire of the consequences, if P is true. So I want to live in a world where Q is true, therefore P, the premise, is also true. This came along in a conversation that I had with a colleague. that works with us. It may seem that all we talk about is modes of transportation. It is a lot about what I talk about. And we're talking about cars. And he is like, we are definitely going to have self-driving cars in the near future. 1 or 2 years, tops. Because I just hate driving. So it's like, you hate driving, therefore, it's an absolute truth that self-driving cars are evident. That's not quite how it works. Just the fact that you want it doesn't make it true. And I do that a lot in engineering teams. So you can imagine you have a queue of users on your platform wanting features, and you're there like, what do my users really want? How are they configuring their services? How they're requesting the things? What are blocking them in getting access to the tools that they need? You know what? Let's focus this iteration to build telemetry. We're going to build like dial back, a lot of features. Let's spend 2 months building it, and then we'll know. We'll have the data to support what they need. And that's you just flying along while all of your users are waiting for whatever they need. Another way that this shows up is by what I'm calling here cost-based design. You're like, we want to save costs. We want to live in a world where our team is very cheap to run, doesn't spend a lot of money, doesn't spend a lot of time. You're thinking about how can my users interact with my platform, right? Well, we are all back-end sort of engineers. We know Bash. Let's build a CLI. This needs to be true. We need to build a CLI because that's the only way that we can save costs. But that may not be necessarily what your users want. So you may save in costs in the short run, but not necessarily in the long run. And then finally, a favorite, which is the build and they will come. Like, people want to live in a world where they have access to all the services that they need, on demand, easy peasy. So let's just build a platform. They will obviously come. Like, there's no way that they're not going to use our products if we just build it. Let's just ship it. It's simple. The first thing you should do when you believe that this is happening is double check. Because it is a valid argumentation method to say, I believe that our teams are being blocked because they don't have access to the services that they need. If we provide a way for them to get access on demand, let's say by providing a platform on top of Kubernetes, they may have access to the services that they need, and then they may, move faster. That's a valid argumentation. You're not saying that they will only move faster if you build the platform, but you're saying if we have a platform, there is an eventuality that maybe they will move faster. So that's a valid way of argumenting. But if you do believe that someone is presuming the consequence, assuming the truth of the premise by assuming the truth of the consequence, then you may ask for evidence. What evidence do you have that a CLI will actually going to save us any money or going to make it any cheaper? And also consider counterexamples. So you want it to be cheaper? Yes, building telemetry is a great way to get user data, but can you just talk to people a little bit? Can you just sit down in a room and ask them what they need? Maybe that's cheaper, right? That's the same consequence. We are saving money, but with a different premise. So other things may be true that will cause that particular consequence. There are many more. We only have 30 minutes, so let's just spit out through some. I'm just going to throw them in your way. The argument from ignorance is a very simple one. I don't really know, therefore, there's nothing I can do. Prove me that Bigfoot doesn't exist. You can't, so it must exist. It must be true. There is the ad hominem fallacy, which is the personal attack. It's like, you are an idiot, therefore, everything you say is false. So that is not that recommended for working environments, but it seems that the way that politics work a lot of the time. We have the false equivalence fallacy. So it quacks like a duck, walks like a duck. It's definitely a duck. You probably heard this before. Fun fact is, they say that the origin of this particular saying is based on a French automaton maker that made a mechanical duck. So it wasn't actually a duck. Nonetheless, there is the appeal to bandwagon. Everybody's doing AI. When are you going to do AI, right? It has to happen. Millions of people believe that the Earth was flat and that the sun spin around the Earth. That did not make it true. I hope that everyone believes now that the Earth is a sphere that spins around the sun. That also doesn't make it true, but we have the evidence, the scientific data to prove that out. And I think an important one to keep in mind after we leave this talk, there is the fallacy, which is like, hey, that's a fallacy. Hey, it's a generalization. You are wrong. I'm right. That also doesn't make it true. And I was just going to pass back to Winna for, sorry, not quite yet. So there are many more. So if you go to the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, there is like a partial list containing 231 fallacies. Aristotle, in like a book ages ago, listed 13, and then people got fascinated about it, and they found a few more. And we're now going to go to one last one.
Great. So the final one we wanted to cover is the argument from authority fallacy. This is where you say a thing is true because the person or the source who said it is really trustworthy. Right? This is how marketing works. You buy a thing because this person that you trust said it's good. Right? Fundamentally, it's based on the idea that people can't be wrong, which we fundamentally know is wrong. So with that, we will pull back a slide from earlier and say we've stood up here from a position of authority about platform engineering, but we want to remind you that we don't know everything. We're wrong about a lot of stuff. And we urge you all to learn more. The inspiration for the talk was a podcast that Derik discovered called Philosophize This, and they have 2 back-to-back episodes, which are quite a fun listen. So please do, if you have time, take a listen. And then, as Derik mentioned, there's an internet encyclopedia of philosophy. So have fun, and thanks very much.